All right, welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. My name is Adam and I'll be your moderator. We're joined by Ali Oromchian from HR for Health, and he will be discussing what you need to know to make your practice compliant in 2022. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to add them to the Q&A section and we'll answer them at the end. And Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand. Ali, over to you.
Awesome, Adam. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the seminar tonight. It's going to be jam-packed. There's a lot of things to go through. There's been a lot of law updates, of course, on the HR side that we're going to talk about tonight. But there's a gap, right? And I'm not talking, as you can probably imagine, about denim or sweaters. I'm talking about a gap that a lot of us as small business owners are currently facing when we're talking about HR in our practices. It's a super stressful time. There's absolutely no doubt about it. January came around and I think hit a lot of businesses, mine including, really, really hard when it came to the Omicron variant. As many of you have seen, your staff has been either out sick with COVID or severe flu-like, symptoms that, maybe were not COVID, but were the flu, or other similar types of things. And then there's the employees who, just decide to use it as an excuse to not be in the office, and they think everyone is not as clever as them, but they're not. And so it's been a stressful time for a lot of us. And the gap that I'm really talking about right now is one where we have this intent as business owners. And a lot of you tonight are just that. You're dental entrepreneurs. I mean, this is what you do. You have your own practices. You have a great group of employees that you're working with that you're trying to do the best you can with your patients during a really trying time. But you want to be HR compliant. You want to be safe. You don't want to think about these lawsuits and other things that happen in dentistry right now. So you have this intent. And this intent is a good intent, is to want to be compliant and to provide your team with all the things that they deserve, whether it's benefits, whether it's just being transparent about the office. But then there's the result, and the result is very different than your intent. And this is something that is important for us to really keep in mind today, because if we want our intent, or if our intent is to be HR compliant, if our intent is to make sure that we're not losing sleep at night and that we're doing everything correctly as far as these rules are concerned, then we have to take action and we have to take steps to make sure that we are doing everything correct to be HR compliant so that we have the results that we want, which is a stronger staff team, less turnover, a stronger, kind of relationship with our team, which, as many of you know, and you've seen me do this, this other presentation where we talk about, employees first, right? If we focus on our employees, they will take care of our patients. And if they take care of the patients, they will take care of our finances and the profits. And so it's a little bit different than the way we normally think about, our offices, because a lot of times we focus on the profits and the revenue as opposed to focusing on the team first, but they are the driver. And so tonight is one of those seminars where you're going to get given a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of data that I'm going to give you. We are, some of it applies to all of you. Some of it is very state specific. So we're going to go state by state to those that, make a difference. And then we're going to talk about some strategies to do between now and in the next couple of months, if you will, to get compliant. Those of you who don't know me, I am a dental attorney. This is all I do. This is my family, and my wife is a pediatric dentist here in California. And so I live your life. I'm going through everything all of you are going through her practice and the things that she's experiencing, of course. But of course, also as a dental lawyer with 5,000-6,000 patient clients or more. We deal with this every single day. And so this is a big part of what I do. So feel free to write down your questions. And if we have time at the end, I'll definitely answer them. If not, I'll make sure that we respond to you offline. If it's a very state-specific question, I'll make sure to do that as well. But I'm excited to go through this agenda with you because we have a lot to cover. One is we're going to talk about what happened at the end of the year and what's going on with the vaccine mandates right now moving forward. Then we're going to talk about updates to new laws. And this is one of those kind of weird years where there's actually not a ton of new laws at the federal level, but there are a lot at the state and local level. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And of course, it goes without saying that there's going to be a ton of vaccine and COVID related rules that we're going to talk about. And then we're going to talk about how to prep for 2022. We're, just, crossed into February. So we still have time to do some things that we may not have done in January to get up to speed and get ready to make this a great year. So, and as a gift, for all of you, we're giving you two things. One is we have this handbook 2022 handbook checklist for you to download. If you scan that QR code on the screen, you'll get a pop-up, and then it will be able to send it to you to your email address. This is a really great reference guide for you for your employment manual this year because there's been a lot of changes. And I'm highly recommending that you do not, have to go to a law firm and spend thousands of dollars updating your manual for 2022, or to one of these mom and pop, organizations that, put these kind of, manuals together and email it to you or send it to you in a box or something ridiculous like that. You don't need to do things, on paper anymore. You don't need to do that. Don't save your money. Focus on this checklist. It's really, really powerful. And as an added gift for many of you, if any of you want our team at HR for Health to review your employment manual and to go through it with you and identify the areas that you need to bolster using this checklist and others, when you sign up, our team will follow up with you. Just let them know that you want that done, and they'll do it complimentary. And we're doing this, specifically for just Henry Schein customers. So let's jump into the legal recap of what happened last year. As many of you know, towards the end of the year, President Biden tried to pass some rules through OSHA where, employers with 100 or more employees had to, ensure that they were all vaccinated. And then there were, fears that, at the state level, they were going to follow these same kind of parameters and rules and force all employers to make sure that all their employees are vaccinated. That, of course, as many of you heard, hit a wall, a really solid wall in the court system. The Supreme Court finally ruled on it, last month, and said that, that was not something that was legal, that was not going to pass, and sent it back to the federal courts. And then just very recently, I think it was last week, President Biden basically said that they are kind of, not pursuing that mandate as of this point. And what the Supreme Court basically said was not that the mandate was wrong or that it was bad for our health to have or anything of that nature. What the Supreme Court said that the president and OSHA were the wrong sort of entities to push this forward. In other words, OSHA was created for workplace safety, So, sharps containers, kind of workers' comp types of stuff to keep employees safe in their workplace. That was what OSHA was intended for. It was not intended for their health mandates. In other words, what they can or cannot do from a health perspective. And so it's a very, specific, legal point and differentiation that is being made, rightly or wrongly. But, they did make it. So that is the rule. So now, OSHA has given up on that, and we're, sort of moving forward. Whether or not, the president tries to do this again through another agency is yet to be seen. What we do know, and this is important for a lot of you, is that if your state has their own version of OSHA, then you have to be aware that they can pass their own rules. And so some states, including California, does have its own rules, regarding masks and other things, and localities, local jurisdictions across the country have similar rules, which we'll talk about in a bit. So just kind of keep that in mind. For those of you who are Medicaid service providers, you take Medicaid in your offices, there is a vaccine mandate there. that does apply, and that did get approved by the courts. And so if you do provide Medicare or Medicaid services to your patients, then that vaccine mandate does apply to you. But for many of you tonight, that is likely not applicable. So we can kind of move on. All right. Let's jump into the vaccine mandates nationwide. So there is a trend, not surprisingly, but especially within healthcare, where vaccines are being required for your team members, and this is becoming a more and more powerful movement. There are more and more counties, and cities, kind of pushing this forward. Right now, it's important to know that there's not sort of a state that mandates it as of this moment, but a lot of local jurisdictions are, depending on the COVID cases that they have and the numbers, in their state. So kind of keep that in mind. Proof of vaccination, some areas, right, have this as a prohibition, meaning, you can't necessarily ask your employees if they are vaccinated or not. And some jurisdictions, of course, don't have that prohibition. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. Again, it's becoming really difficult to manage some of this at the national and state levels because a lot of these rules are very local rules. And so it's important to keep these things in mind as you're kind of reading the news and gathering information and trying to go to resources, because people might be giving you kind of new, information that is not necessarily tied to your specific jurisdiction. And that's a huge problem, because if you have conflicts of rules, which there are a ton of conflicts when it comes to these kinds of rules, you have to always follow what is the most beneficial or the strictest for the employee. What is the better rule for the employee? And by the way, that means really looking at the rules and differentiating parts of it and taking out parts that are more beneficial, let's say from the federal rule, and that applies to the employees. But if a state rule has a part of it that is more beneficial to the employee, then that part of that rule applies. And so again, it can be really, really complex, but don't fret. That's why HR for Health is here. That's why it's a partner of Henry Schein. We are here to support you through all of this, right? We have an entire team of HR professionals that are focused on these kinds of rules. So make sure you absolutely don't guess on any of this. You just have to pick up the phone or email us or call us, and we will help you through this, because we understand it's super, super complex. And if it wasn't complex enough, then we run into qualifying exemptions that apply to certain employees. Now, what does this mean? Well, what has happened is that I think the courts and states have realized that there are real valid reasons why some employees are not able to get the vaccine, even if they're in healthcare, even if they're in the front lines. And so what are these exemptions? Well, right now, the top two ones that we're seeing across the country are medical exemptions and religious exemptions. So what that means is that if you have a medical exemption, you have a condition that prevents you from getting the vaccine, or that you would be harmed if you got the vaccine, then that is a medical exemption. And a doctor's note indicating that is sufficient, right? It doesn't have to go into detail as to why and anything of that nature, but a doctor's note is sufficient. Then there's the religious side. And if someone has a religious belief that prevents them from getting the vaccine, then they are exempt as well, and they don't need to get the vaccine. That doesn't mean that they're scot-free, of course. You do and can, test them. And we are recommending, unless it's not legal where you are, to have them tested at least weekly if your employees fall into either one of these categories. Right now, there is some ambiguity about who pays for the test. And what if the employee is gone, to go get tested from from an outside center, who pays for their time to be gone? The rules here vary a little bit nationwide, but if you want to be safe, you should, as the employer, pay for the test, and you should also pay them while they're getting tested. Now, the easiest thing, of course, is to get these tests and do them in the office, have your office manager or someone do it for the employee, and then maintain the results. And that works really, really well. The one thing I will encourage you not to do, and if you are thinking about doing this, please call me, at the law firm so I can talk to you about this, which is to terminate an employee if they fall into one of these accommodations, right? If they have a religious accommodation or medical. Now, I know it's easier said than done because there are groups out there who are handing out religious exemptions. If you donate to their church or if you donate to this group or that group. There are some bad actors across the country who are doing this for sure. And that they're not really truly, held beliefs. But there are also a lot of people who have truly held religious beliefs along this line. And so it's very hard to differentiate. And we don't want you to be in that business of looking somebody in the eye and saying, are you really religious? Is this a real religious belief? That's not your place. And somebody can change their religious beliefs overnight. And so it's a very, very tricky thing. We are seeing complaints being filed and lawyers sending letters, demand letters to our doctors regarding these topics. And so even though we're defeating them and we're able to push back hard, it's not a fight worth fighting for. And so if you have any concerns about these kind of scenarios and you want to walk through them, please feel free to call me or HR for Health so we can walk you through it, because these are very, very important topics to discuss. So as you go through this process, it's called the interactive process, which is a process not unlike what you would go through with an employee who maybe is disabled or injured in the office. And so keep that in mind. You do want to talk to them. You do want to, see what options are available for them to be safe in the office. If it's a front receptionist and they have a medical exemption, what can you do that you're not already doing? By the way, many of you are already doing these things, the plexiglass, the PPEs, the air sanitizer, wipe, machines and the wipes and all of that. You're doing a lot of things already. And so you may not have to do much more, but it's good to go through that interactive process. And remember, you only have to do things that are reasonable, right? You only have to do things that are reasonable. We had a situation not too long ago in the Midwest where an employee asked the doctor to change the HVAC system of their office into a medical grade HVAC system, as opposed to the HVAC that came with their complex, which is obviously a ridiculous request. Even if it wasn't $100,000 machine, it would still be a ridiculous request. And so there are a lot of little things that you can do. Now, one of the main questions we get a lot of times is, should I have my own vaccine policy? Should I have a booster policy? And, the question is it too soon? And, this is a very personal question. Is it too soon for you? Well, it may be in some areas of the country, and in some areas, no. There's a lot of places, along the coast, California, New York, Washington State, Washington, D.C., even parts of Virginia, where, the boosters are becoming much more part of everyday life. And, if you want to go to a basketball game or a football game or whatnot, you might need to be boosted. And so as a private business, and this is important to remember, as a private business in the United States, you can set your own policies with regard to vaccines and boosters. And so that is something that you can put together and make sure that it's in your employment manual and also disclose to the employees. And now, is it easy? No, because, obviously, this is an emotionally charged topic and people are all across the board, in terms of how they feel about it. And so you may end up losing employees. You may end up, making people upset. And so it's important to, talk to them and figure out if this is something that, before you do it, that would sit well with them. And so it's not necessarily too soon, or is it too late to think about doing it? But the fact that the booster is available right now is a major part of kind of these policies and these mandates. And it's becoming more common where to be considered fully vaccinated, you must have the booster. Okay. Now let's talk about domestic travel a little bit. As many of you know, I travel the country to speak on these topics, and we've been blessed to speak at a lot of national and state shows. A lot of you are starting to travel as well. You are going to be going to conventions. You're going to be going to study club meetings. You're going to be going to other events where maybe your consultants or others have invited you to go, and you're going to take your team. And so the question is, well, what do I do about domestic travel? So the good news is that there are no kind of national requirements or prohibitions from traveling if you're not vaccinated, as far as the CDC is concerned or other groups. But there are things that you can do and things as a business owner that I think are smart, right? So of course you want to advise your employees, especially if you are the one taking them on a trip, that you should look and make sure you're very, very familiar with the airline requirements. Most of them right now just require that you are masked, from the time you're there at the airport to the time you depart. But of course, and some people are not comfortable with that. And so you got to be aware of that, especially if they have medical conditions or whatnot, which, you may know if they're in the office and they feel uncomfortable wearing their mask in the office as well. But then the question is, well, what about vaccinations? What about testing if someone is vaccinated versus not vaccinated? And so I think if they are not vaccinated, right, if they're not vaccinated, that, having them tested, a couple of days before, and then, maybe for a few days after you return from your trip is always a good idea. Now, is this a foolproof plan? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. There was a dental convention recently, and a speaker, tested negative before he departed. Actually, 2 days before he departed, he tested negative, got sick during this convention, and then by the time he came home and tested again, he tested positive, right? He tested positive. And so clearly he was sick, before he left for the trip, because as soon as he arrived, he started seeing some serious, ailments, and still did his presentation, and then, ended up flying back home, which also I think may have been a bad decision, but regardless, kind of came back home and then tested positive after that. So this is a big deal, right? This is a big deal. So my point is that it's not foolproof. It's not foolproof. You're just hoping that you are able to avoid it. Now, from what we have gathered, is that if you do a PCR test, you may be able to test positive even without showing symptoms. But these at-home tests seem to indicate that they are more accurate if you have symptoms, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. Of course, there is a lot of information out there. Some of you have seen this from, state associations. I don't think the ADA has put anything about this, that, some providers out there who are selling these at-home kits, they're selling them at pretty steep discounts, $15, $10, things of that nature, are actually, not, are not accurate in their results, right? They're not effective. And so, I think going with a manufacturer that, the CDC recommends is probably a good idea, just to kind of be safe. I know they're, a little bit more expensive. They're $25, $30. But you may be, better off in that sense. So for what it's worth. All right, let's go into some new laws. So as I mentioned, the good news is that from a federal level, there aren't that many new laws. There's just a couple of new laws that we're going to talk about. But at the state level, there's a lot, right? At the state level, there's a lot. So at the federal level, the Department of Labor still requires physical posters in your offices, so you can't do anything about that. But they now also want you to send electronic copies of those postings and other, employment postings to your remote employees. And so you can email those to them and be okay. If you're on HR for Health, of course, a lot of this is on the system, and so they have access to it there. So you don't necessarily need to worry about that as part of the new hire documents. So keep that in mind, which is great. Now, the changes, from minimum wage laws, though, has occurred, at the state and local levels. And this is very different, right? So a lot of change has happened here. And I want to bring up something very important. Many of you are paying way more than minimum wage across the country. And so it's not really a question of, are you paying minimum wage? The question, though, is if you have salaried employees who you are not paying overtime because they are exempt, right? So it's not just enough that they're salary, but they have to be exempt as well. If they are exempt from overtime, you have to make sure that your salary is double minimum wage. That's the very common rule. And so if minimum wage has gone up a couple of dollars, then you may have to adjust the salary of those employees to ensure that you are over the minimum wage or the exempt qualification, so that you can continue just paying them, or not paying them overtime, right? So keep that in mind. Hugely important. All right, harassment laws. And so here, as many of you know, a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago now, there were a slew of new harassment laws that got passed requiring many of you who have supervisors and non-supervisors to be to view and or attend anti-harassment seminars, both on the sexual harassment side and otherwise. And these are coming up and in their annual reviews. And so for many of you, you have to have them go through the class again because it has been 2 years since the last time they took it. So just kind of keep that in mind. That being said, there is some changes happening in some states. And so I'm going to go through a couple of them with you. So Connecticut's rules, that were effective last July, some of you may or may not know. All employers have to provide the training to their supervisors. If you have 3 or more employees, you have to provide it to the supervisors and to the regular employees as well. So hugely important there. So these are not difficult things that you have to go through, right? They are usually available via video, and your local dental societies will probably have that information for you or where you can go to view it. But what's important, and what I want you to keep in mind, is that you need to keep the documentation, right? You need to keep the documentation and the proof that your employees attended these seminars. This is one thing that I cannot stress enough. We have seen a handful of sexual harassment claims over the last couple of years, because as you can imagine, somebody goes to a sexual harassment class and they go, oh my gosh, yes, the doctor, looked at me kind of funny, so that must be sexual harassment. And then they come and file a complaint, and then you have to kind of deal with all of that. Well, sometimes, right? Sometimes, those things are accurate and they're valid and we have to, defend you. And sometimes they're not. Right? Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's an excuse for someone who wants to leave, or an aggressive plaintiff's lawyer. Sadly, this is my world, right? Sadly, this is the kind of world that I live in. And I see a lot of these kinds of cases. Well, these sexual harassment seminars and the proof that they have attended them is really vital in your defense, right? It's really, really vital in your defense, because if they've gone to a seminar and this seminar has said, which they all do, I give this seminar myself, so I know, the content. If the seminar says that they must, notify a supervisor, and if they don't feel comfortable with that supervisor, they have to go to the owner, and so on and so forth. And there's kind of an instruction of how to file a complaint. If they don't go through that process, for example, then a lot of their claim may not be valid, right? They may not be valid. And so there's, and that's just one example of how you can defend yourself if you're, if you're attacked by someone who, is claiming something that is not true. But guess what? You need the documentation. You need the documentation. And this is where I strongly urge everyone to keep these things electronically, right? This is one of the reasons we developed HR for Health, was to protect you, right? Was to protect you, because nothing can get deleted from HR for Health without your knowledge. Whereas if you keep things on paper, in a paper file, then you can imagine how easily those things can be lost or disappear, out of convenience when someone wants to actually do something legal, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. Texas has some new rules as of September. Maryland has some new rules. So just know that you have some of these obligations, right? And if you have questions about these specific rules, let me know these. But as I mentioned, these requirements don't stop at just completing the seminar, but it's your responsibility to keep the records. A lot of times you have to keep these for 3 years, sometimes longer. And so if you use the certification tracking feature that we have at HR for Health, you'll see that you'll know when they're expired, when they have to retake the exam. And as I mentioned, they're in a really, really secure place. All right, let's go to equal pay laws. So, as part of the Me Too movement, has kind of grown into, other rules. And part of those rules is also rules about equal pay and ensuring that this is happening across industries. And so, in our industries, it's important to remember that, in some situations, this tends to be less of an issue, right? Tends to be less of an issue. Yet you are still bound by these rules, right? You're still bound by these rules. So it's important to update your interview process to make sure that you're using, the correct employment applications. Especially, you want to make sure they're state specific. And it's one of my beefs, if you will, with a lot of these payroll companies that pretend to do HR is that they say, they do HR and they look all sexy and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is they're just giving you federal forms, right? They're just giving you federal forms and they're not really focusing on the state stuff. And so that's where HR for Health really differentiates itself, is that everything is very state specific, especially when it comes to these kinds of rules about equal pay and whatnot. It's these small things, right? The application, what questions you can ask, what questions you can't ask. And we're going to get into those in a second. But we can provide you with all of these details and to make sure that you have the latest and greatest. All right. So speaking of that, let's go to some EEO updates, right? So these are federal updates, by the Equal Employment Opportunity, Department that really talks about what you can and can't do in a practice. And part of this has to do with hiring, of course, firing. And then for those of you who are new to practice ownership, meaning you're just starting out, maybe you just bought a practice or you're thinking about buying a practice, these rules really impact you because it's easy to fall prey to them. So let me give you a couple of examples. In Colorado and Maine, as just two examples, you cannot discriminate based on gender identity, right? So if someone comes to you and they identify as a gender that is different than the gender that they were given at birth, and you discriminate against that, then you have liability, right? The same thing happens if, someone identifies with the same gender that they are when they were born, but they dress in the opposite gender, right? So they still identify, let's say, as a man, but they dress as a woman. That could be, and you discriminate, that could be a problem. Now, many dentists that I know across the country, regardless of their personal beliefs, would not discriminate against someone, let's say, based on their gender identity. They may not be comfortable with it. They may not, they may not like it, but they won't discriminate against it. But it's not necessarily what you want to do, but what the impression of what you've done, that sometimes becomes a problem. So if you don't take steps to protect yourself when you're not hiring this person, right, then you could leave the door open for these kinds of claims, right, for these kind of claims. So you just have to be careful. You have to be careful. And there are things you can do, taking notes during the interview process, having the right application, asking the right questions, doing a pre-screen. There's a lot of little things that you can do to protect yourself. And that is important. Connecticut, also, New Mexico, has rules regarding hairstyles. And so you can't discriminate against hairstyles. As you can see, it's getting broader and broader and broader. And this is a problem for many of us in the small business world that we all live in, but especially a lot of you, because you may be trying to set forward a certain image in your practice, right? You may have a very boutique practice, You may have maybe a practice focused on children. You may have, something where someone's hairstyle, their dress, whatnot, may not be appropriate. And so in those situations, you have to be very careful about how you manage, the hiring and the firing of that employee. Otherwise, you'd be opening yourself up to some liability. So just kind of, think about that. Remember, I'm not expecting you to become a dental lawyer after tonight, nor am I expecting you to know all these rules by heart by the time we're done. What I am expecting, and what I hope deep down that you will do, is that when you face these situations, you will say, you know what, I know who to call. Let me raise my hand. Let me call Ali. Let me call HR for help. Let me get some help in resolving these issues, because that's the key. Raise your hand and ask for help. That's why we're all here, to help you kind of navigate through it. This is not a battle that you have to go into on your own, okay, on your own. So remember that. Just raise your hand and ask for help. Let us help you kind of figure it out. It's always going to be easier and better for you. Okay, let's go to sick leave now. Sick leave. It almost seems like nobody's talking about sick leave anymore, considering what's happened with COVID. But sick leave is still a major law that has been expanded around the country. Obviously, the federal government has passed. It's now expired, by the way, but had passed during COVID the FFCRA rules regarding paid sick leave if someone's out for COVID and things of that nature. A lot of states, including California, right now, they're in the middle of it, are trying to negotiate very state-specific rules regarding paid sick leave related to COVID. That is in addition to the state rule that they have going on right now. So my advice here with paid sick leave is that be careful with it, because it is very, very specific at the state and local level. A lot of local municipalities have their own rules. As you can see from this slide, the rules, in New York, Colorado, Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, right? In Pittsburgh, are very specific, right? Are very specific. In other parts of the state or the county may not have the same rules. And so you just have to keep an eye out for this, because there are a lot of rules. And the smallest cities that you would never think have their own rules, have sometimes their own rules around the country regarding paid sick leave. So just be aware of it. Again, ask us, let us know what state you're in, and we'll help you. Here are two more, in Pennsylvania, with their own rules. Again, we can help you with these policy creations and tracking them. One of the best things about our time clock system is that it's tied to benefits. And so as people clock in and clock out, it manages your entire benefits protocol. So you don't have to keep track of how many sick days or other, vacation requests or anything of that nature. It's all managed electronically, so super, super effective. And so while these sick leave laws vary state to state, there's almost always two specific requirements that you have to follow, right, in every state. This is if you're offering, of course, this to your team members, right? So the first requirement is that you have to have a written policy outlining your sick leave policy that you're providing to your employees, right? This is a given, and this has to be in your employment manual. It's absolutely essential, and you can't go around it. Now, a lot of payroll companies and others are not doing this for you, right? They are not providing this because it is so specific, right? And so if you have a mature practice and maybe you're providing more sick time or more PTO than what the state minimum is, and many of you are, and so I salute you for that. Just remember, it has to be written down. It has to be absolutely clear while you're still, acknowledging and adhering to the minimums that the state provides. Okay, so just remember that. Now, the second requirement is a little bit more difficult, right? The second requirement is that you got to have transparency and tracking of the hours, right? Transparency and tracking of the hours. The employees need to be able to see in real time, right, how much or how many hours they have remaining at any given point, right? At any given point. And so this is an important point, right? They have to be able to look and be able to identify how many hours they've earned and more importantly, how many hours they have left and how they can use it, right? This is not something that's provided by any other system that we know of other than HR for Health for dentists. And so this is really, really vital. Could you keep track of it on an Excel spreadsheet? Sure, absolutely. Could you keep track of it in some other kind of, antiquated, difficult system? Absolutely. But you know what? It's not going to be perfect. And more importantly, it's not going to be available to them in real time the way you want it to be, right? Remember what we talked about before, right? There's a difference, there's a gap between our intent and the results, right? What we want is to be transparent. We want our employees to, feel empowered and safe and be able to ask for vacation time whenever they want without feeling pressured or without feeling guilty, or more importantly, without coming to you and saying, hey, how many hours do I have? And then, and are you sure? And I think I took a Tuesday off but then I canceled it and I don't think you added back on. Like, you don't want to deal with any of that, right? You don't want to deal with any of that. And that's one of the biggest perks of HR for Health is we track all of that for you. And it's a huge, huge, huge benefit. So make sure you're meeting these two requirements and you're compliant because that is a huge potential problem that happens, especially when you don't pay them correctly, right? Or you're not tracking it correctly. All right, let's move to family leave. So there's been an expansion of family leave around the country as well. So the definition has expanded in certain areas having to do with paid sick leave and paid vacation and whatnot. And so now it includes more family members. And of course, the leave is protected. So we won't go through this in much detail tonight, but just know that in many states, these rules are expanded, especially with what's happening with COVID. I mean, it's one of the reasons why these rules are changing is because, it's impacting family members. And so if you are home and your kids and your grandparents or your parents and your cousins and so on and so forth are sick, you're taking care of them. And so your job should be protected, right? Now, I realize that many of you are having a hard time hiring people. At least you're having a hard time hiring good people and you're training them. So the likelihood of you terminating someone simply because they took, a couple of days to take care of a family member is very, very low, unless you're in the rare minority where you have an excess number of amazing employees. But the reality is that their job is protected, right? Their job is protected. And so right now, almost anything having to do with COVID, illness or otherwise, is probably protected under the new family leave laws. And so I would highly discourage you from terminating anybody that fits into that category. And more importantly, remember, raise your hand, ask for help. Let us help you, walk you through that. Okay, let's shift gears, right? Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about retirement benefits. So for many of you, over the course of your career, you didn't provide a lot of benefits when you first started because you were trying to keep the practice profitable and grow. And then as the practice grew, you started providing health insurance because that's the most important benefit that employees want. And then you started adding maybe vacation and PTO and maybe, at some point you started adding retirement benefits and 401k and whatnot. Well, right now with what's happening in the country, the states and the federal government have come to realize that there is a serious problem with regard to employees in being able to retire. And there is a very little amount of money that a lot of employees have set aside. And so they really can't retire. And so some states have started to enact their own retirement protocols where they are requiring employers to provide 401k or similar types of programs to their employees. As an example, in California, employees with 50 or more, employers, I should say, with 50 or more employees had to start providing 401k last July, as of June, July of this year, anybody with 5 or more employees will have to provide a 401k product. The good news is that we at HR for Health have been working really, really hard to develop a program that will manage this and keep the costs low. And we've done just that. We've been able to create a really wonderful product just targeted to dentists for a 401k plan that has incredibly low rates, and it's all being passed on to you. We recently, we're working with a DSO who had, many offices, and we saved them, I think it was $12,000 or whatnot in just fees, and this wasn't like a 500 person DSO. I mean, this was a large one, but it was not large, not huge. And so my point is that, these kinds of fees you're going to be able to benefit from. So please make sure you take advantage of them. If you have any questions about them, let me know or let us know, and we'll make sure to refer you to our team on the 401k side. But these fees are not things that you get any benefit from, right? These are things that you're just paying it as an expense, and no one's really pushed them on it. And so we've been able to go and negotiate a really amazing deal because of our buying power. And so now we're passing all of this on to you. But this is a very real thing. And as July approaches, this is going to become even more, important, because you're going to have it, up and running by then. And so the sooner you start, the better. So don't delay. Oregon has a very similar situation. They also have a plan that you must, adhere to. So keep that in mind. Now, the state versions, a lot of these states have their sort of own version that they do. California's is called Cal Savers. Oregon's is called Oregon Saves, I believe. Those are good, right? They're okay, but they're not intended for you, right? They're intended for the dry cleaners or the laundromats or the people who really don't have a support system. For you as high income earners, you want to be able to provide this retirement benefit, but then on top of that, you want to also be able to put a ton of money away yourself. And so, by working with, specialists like our team, you'll be able to do that. And a lot of our clients, are putting in $50,000, $60,000 away and then paying their employees as well, of course. But they're paying a small fraction of that total dollar amount, for their employees, and they're able to stash a ton away themselves. And so remember, it has to be structured properly. There's a lot of details to it, a lot of ways for them to kind of, kind of get you with all their fees. And so if you have any questions about it, reach out to our team and we'll make sure. But this is becoming a thing, and it's going to probably be rampant around the country very soon to deal with this retirement crisis. So the sooner you get it, in place, the better. But don't worry, right? There are, a lot of the states have language in there that you don't have to contribute if you don't want to, right? You don't have to contribute. You have to have it in place so your employees can contribute themselves, but you don't have to contribute if you don't want to, maybe because your practice can't afford it. And so we'll walk you through all those if necessary. All right. So as we go to the last 10 minutes, let's talk about how to prep for 2022. So, this HR solutions, HR software has been a solution that is necessary for many, many years, of course. It's one of the reasons we created HR for Health and why it's grown as it has. But this year, it's more important than ever because of all these rule changes that we're talking about. But more important than that, it's really about the management of all of these rule changes. It's about the governance of it. It's about tracking it. And you guys are just not in the business of doing this. And I'll tell you, it's not just you. There are large group practices that we speak to, executives, private equity people, who also know nothing about HR, right? So this is why a large percentage of our clients are offices that have 1, 2, 3 offices, because you are in the same boat as our group practices that have 10, 15, 20, 30 offices. HR is just complex, right? It's just complex. And so you need a tool to be able to help you through it. And that's where, HR for Health kind of comes in. Here are the minefields to avoid. All right. So let's go through the next couple slides. Hugely important to talk about these. One is figure out, if you haven't already, what paid holidays you're going to pay for in this calendar year. I know it seems like a small thing, but it's very important for your team. And more importantly, it avoids confusion. It avoids confusion. This is the biggest thing that I see is we want to avoid confusion, right? Because these plaintiffs' lawyers, they love confusion, right? You promise to pay, Memorial Day to your employees. You promised to pay the day after Thanksgiving to your employees, and you didn't, right? So now we're going to sue you, and so on and so forth. I know it seems petty, but that's exactly what they do. So you want to spell it out. And more importantly, you want it to say, hey, if the holiday falls on a weekend, for example, and you're not scheduled to work on weekends, because that's not what we do, you're not going to be paid for that holiday, right? Because you wouldn't have been paid anyways. But if it's 4th of July and 4th of July falls on a Tuesday and we're always working on Tuesday, well, then of course I'm going to pay you because you would have been paid otherwise. So keep that in mind and make sure it's in your manual. Hugely important. And that's the next thing. Get your employment handbook reviewed, right? As a surprise to many of you, I mentioned it earlier, I'll mention it again at the end. We will review your employment handbook for you. We will help you figure out where the issues are, and if you need it to be updated, our team can update it as part of our service, of course. But we'll identify the issues that you have found. Don't get crazy and spend thousands of dollars on a law firm or anything else. You have access to us at this point. You don't need to go down that road. Because it is very expensive and it's a one-time thing, whereas our manuals, we update it for you for free every year. Okay, a huge difference. Thousands of dollars savings just right there. All right, do a job analysis, right? Make sure you're classifying your employees correctly. Now, many of you are hiring your doctor associates as independent contractors. It's something that I don't blame you, because it was something that was okay for many years. I mean, the IRS wouldn't agree with me that it was okay, but there were ways to get around this issue, because the doctors were structured in a certain way, and you didn't control them, and you paid them differently. They had their own businesses and they were independent, and so it was fine. You could deal with that. The laws have changed. Right? It has become much more difficult since January of 2021 to hire an independent contractor. And so now you are taking an extra risk, because both the federal government and the state are coming together, and they have passed a lot of strict rules that basically makes it impossible to hire an independent contractor for a doctor associate in the office. Is it impossible? Impossible? No. We can maybe do it, but you're taking a risk. Right? You're taking a risk. And so if you're risk averse, right, you want to sleep at night, you don't want to deal with the IRS, you don't want to deal with the state, if you have independent contractors, let us know, and you can change them to an employee, give them a new contract, and you're fine. If you are willing to take some risk, then, keep them as an independent contractor if you wish, just knowing that there's risk involved there. And then as you hire new people, associates, hire them as employees, and then the old independent contractors can kind of retire, or when they leave your employment, they you can just kind of replace them. But what I want to mention is, please make sure that no one else in your office is an independent contractor, right? There should be no one, no hygienist, no RDA, no DA, no one else should be an independent contractor other than your doctor associates. And that only in special situations, Now, the other item is exempt versus non-exempt. Who do you pay overtime to? Who do you not pay overtime to? Do that analysis. If you have questions about it, let us know. But there are strict rules about that, and you don't want to mess up overtime issues. All right, ban the box. These are new rules being passed around the country regarding criminal background checks. A lot of states are now saying that you cannot ask about criminal backgrounds during the application process, or even during the interview process, but you can do a background check after an offer has been given to someone. And if you do a background check after an offer has been given and it comes back positive for criminal activity, Some states allow you to immediately, recant the offer. Some states require you to jump through some hoops before you can recant the offer. And so just kind of know that if you face that situation, it's important to kind of be careful about how you follow up with them after it. But I do recommend that you do a basic, background check on all of your employees. It's important, and you never know what you can find. You don't need to know crazy things like who their last boyfriend or girlfriend was, or what their driving record is. You don't need to know that stuff. You just need a basic background check that checks on felonies and misdemeanors and things of that nature. Cannabis, it is increasing in use, and many states are legalizing it for various reasons. Some for recreational, some is still for medical. You're a private employer, and so what that means is that you set your own rules regarding cannabis use. And no, I'm not recommending that you have your employees light up in the office. But what I'm really talking about is if they smell of smoke or or of marijuana or whatnot, or you can stop them from working that day. For example, you can send them home, or you can have them change their scrubs or change outfits or whatever, because that doesn't necessarily give off the greatest impression for a dental practice to have someone who smells like pot or nicotine. So just kind of just know that rule, right? There's some confusion about that sometimes, but you want to be really consistent with it, right? If you're going to ask your favorite employee to change, you got to make sure, or your least favorite employee to change, you got to ask your favorite employee to change. And some of our doctors ask, well, can I do a drug test? And you got to be careful with drug tests, because if you can't, you should do it for everybody. If you're going to do it for one person, unless unless of course they've done something that has triggered the fact that they are maybe on drugs or alcohol or whatnot. But if you do something like a drug test, if your favorite employee tests positive, you got to let her go if you're going to let everybody else go who tests positive, right? You can't make exceptions, because that's when problems arise. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. All right, now the nitty-gritty of the most common lawsuits that we see has to do with the following, right? One is making sure you have all the documents for all of your employees. On average, it's somewhere between 12 to 18 documents that you need for every single employee. So if you go into your employment handbook or your drawer and you don't have 12 to 18 documents for every employee, then that's a problem. Make sure you get in touch with us so we get them for you. That is your baseline, right? That is your baseline. If you don't have that, you're setting yourself up from some big issues. And I can guarantee you the payroll companies don't have it, and some of these mom and pop organizations don't have it either. They're just focusing at the federal level. Make sure you get the state documents from us and whatnot. Employee performance reviews, please do those. You can do them once a year. You can do them every 6 months. I know they can be tough, but if you have really good data on your employees, tardiness, absence requests, performances, you can really do really wonderful performance reviews and reward them with raises or bonuses or accolades and things of that nature. Really goes far. And we've talked about this before. I'm giving you a lot of options in terms of the employee handbook. There should be no reason why you don't have an updated one. Job descriptions, make sure you get new ones, or if you have not updated them in a while, please look into that. We can send you a lot of really wonderful job descriptions that we have that you can customize as well. Remember, this is how you know whether your employees are doing their tasks or not, by following up. All right, for those of you that missed it in the beginning, here's a QR code for our handbook checklist. Make sure you scan that. Get this checklist in your email. You can reference it all throughout the year. And as an added bonus, as I mentioned earlier, our team is happy to go through your employee manual and help you identify the issues that you have. They'll spot them. They'll let you know what you can do about them. And of course, if you are inclined to do, we are happy to create one for you that's customized just for you as part of our service. and you won't regret it because every year we give you an updated one for free as part of what we do. And so you don't have to worry about all those extra costs associated with it. But let our team kind of review it for you, and we're happy to do that as part of that service. Here's how you can get in touch with us. If you go to henryscheindental.com/webinars, you can get access to our team. Of course, you can go to hrforhealth.com as well and reach out to our team, and we'll make sure to take wonderful care of you. Thank you guys for attending tonight's seminar. Adam, back to you.
All right, thank you. I know we've got a couple questions that came in. So this one is looking at New York specifically, but maybe it applies to other states. If a hygienist is scheduled for a whole day of work and the office closes early, should the hygienist be paid for the full day of work or when the office closes early?
Yeah, great question. So I have to double check this in New York, but many states have a minimum hours rule. So in other words, if somebody comes to work and then the office closes, they have to be paid at least a minimum number of hours. So let's say they come in at 8 and the office closes at 10. So they've only been there for 2 hours. You might have to pay them for 4, which is half a day. Many states have that rule. If you go beyond that, let's say they work, they're scheduled to work 8 hours and the office closes, at the 6-hour mark, then yes, we are recommending that you pay them for the entire day because that's what they were scheduled for. It does a couple of things. It does a couple of things. One, it creates a sense of teamwork, right? And so that, if they're, you have to remember a lot of employees are banking on their hours and their paychecks or whatnot to set their budgets, to pay their rent and other expenses. And so when you cut 2, 3, 4 hours by closing the office down and they don't get paid for it, it really does and can impact them pretty heavily. So, our recommendation is pay them for that. Now, if this happens, more frequently, right? You're frequently closing the office down, then you got to fix your schedule because then you're wasting a lot of money. But if it happens, once a month, it happens, rarely, then pay them for the couple of hours. It's going to be, $20, $30, $40 per employee. But the empowerment that you create and the teamwork that'll be there in terms of goodwill will go a long way. So.
In terms of rules for those who do snow removal, janitorial, mowing staff, can they be classified as independent contractors?
Yes, great question. Yes. So yes, for people who are outside of dentistry, per se, snow removal, this and that, you can totally pay them as a independent contractor, unless you are hiring them as an employee because you have so much snow that you're doing it literally every day, 365 days in the year, which I don't think is anywhere in this country. So you don't need to do that. But if it's a role that is, if it's a role that you're hiring for consistently, yes, you may have to have them as an employee. But if they're outside of dentistry, typically you don't. Gardeners, mowing, all that kind of stuff is different. Yeah.
All right. Another state specific question here, but maybe it pertains to everyone. Is a private office in North Carolina that accepts Medicaid required to have a vaccine mandate for the staff?
Vincent, yes, that is, if you're accepting Medicare or Medicaid, you will have to, follow up with that rule. I highly recommend you look into it very carefully, because there might be an exception for you, but yes.
In California, do we still have to ask unvaccinated employees to test weekly?
Yes.
All right, nice and easy. Is it true there's a $14,000 penalty for having your paycheck withheld for 29 days?
So it depends on what state you're talking about. Every state has kind of different rules, but yes, there are penalties per day, up to sometimes a 30-day maximum. If your last paycheck is withheld, or really any money is withheld. If somebody forgets to pay you overtime, for example, or forgets a PTO or vacation day, then there are penalties attached to that on a daily basis until the maximum is hit. So depending on your state, I don't know the exact rule because I don't know what state you're in, but for the most part, you're probably right.
Question in the chat here, sick pay or PTO difference, are they interchangeable?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So that is incorrect. That is a very common mistake, right? A very common mistake. So sick pay is paid sick leave is something that the states are really pushing, and you can have it as a private employer too if your state is not requiring it. Paid time off is really a combination of sick leave and vacation, right? It's a combination of sick leave and vacation. And so I prefer to give employees paid time off, right? A paid time off. It is just simpler, right? And for most of us, it doesn't matter why an employee is out of the office. It just, they're out of the office. And so if they're out of the office, you have to kind of treat them, the same, regardless of whether it's sick leave or vacation. So I prefer PTO, but what you have to be careful of is if you are doing PTO in a state that provides sick leave, is that your PTO policy, right? Your PTO policy matches the sick leave policy of that state. So as an example, if you're earning 1 hour, or if your state says that you should be giving 1 hour of paid sick leave to your employees for every, let's say, 30 hours they work, then your PTO rule has to be just as strict or better. So it could be 1 hour of PTO for every 30 hours work, or 1 hour of PTO for every 20 hours work. But it can't be, for example, harder to earn PTO than paid sick leave in your state. So.
All right, the floodgates have officially opened. Lots of questions coming in.
Yeah.
Let's see. Can you clarify if we take Medicaid, our employees need to be vaccinated?
What's that?
If we take Medicaid, do our employees need to be vaccinated? Is that what you said?
It depends on there are a lot of exceptions to this rule, and you have to look at it very carefully from a state to state perspective, even though that is a federal rule. The general rule with what's happening with CMS is that yes, but I would say go look at the rules specifically to your office, because you may be exempt from having to provide it. Absolutely.
Okay. Can we pass on a charge from our payroll company if an employee has a garnishment?
No.
All right. We have a denturist who works in-house 1 day a week. IC or no?
I'd have to know more. Know more about that person. It depends on how much control you have of that person, with that person. Do you tell them, where to work, when to work, who to work with? If you're controlling them in that situation, then yes, they might be an employee. But if they just show up, or they can work wherever they want, or on whatever case that you might give them, you're not controlling them, then they could potentially be an IC. The other thing is, if they have their own business, then they might be an IC, right? If they're doing what they're doing for you, for other people, and they have a corporation or whatnot, then that could be it too.
All right. Do you recommend still doing health screening for employees and checking temperature?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of offices have stopped doing that, and then they started again because of Omicron. I don't know. It's a very personal question in your office. Some people are, some people are not. I think there's no necessarily rule that you have to do it, although the CDC still, kind of recommends it, but it's fallen out of favor in many places.
And we do also have a COVID-19 and dentistry webinar series that we put on monthly. So if anyone has COVID specific questions that are not HR related, that is a great series to tune into as well. Yeah. All right. I think we got through all the questions.
Sounds great. All right, everyone. Well, listen, this is we know there's a lot of questions, and we know it's a very confusing time. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's one of the main reasons we are here. Don't worry about, there's no reason to guess. We'll give you all the answers you need. So keep reaching out.
Great. Thanks, Ali. Yeah. Always a pleasure.
Have a good night, everyone.
Yep, we did record it, so we'll get that out to everyone in a week or so. Have a great night.
Great, thanks. Bye-bye.